Hello and welcome to T.C. Williams High School. We're here in the television studio this afternoon for an unscripted press conference with National Public Radio Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman. Mr. Bowman will be joining 15 students from the Journalism 1 class. I'm Mark Eaton, I'm their teacher, and we're glad to welcome you to today's press conference. The press conference is unscripted. Mr. Bowman has a distinguished career in journalism. For approximately 20 years, he was the Pentagon correspondent for the Baltimore Sun. Since 2006, he's been National Public Radio's Pentagon correspondent. And Mr. Bowman will have, I think, an interesting perspective on the news, journalism, and what it's like to cover the activities of our military, not from a desk or from the Pentagon briefing room, but from the theaters where our military personnel actually serve. So we hope you'll join us. It should be an enlightening conversation. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tom Bowman.
Thanks, Mark. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay. I have no opening statement, so we can just forge ahead with questions if you have any. Hopefully you have some.
Hello, I'm Kate Casper, a freshman here at TC, and I was wondering, how did you uncover the Air Force's failure to forward information regarding the Texas shooter?
One of the virtues of covering the Pentagon or any beat for a long time is you develop sources, people who tell you things maybe they shouldn't, and not on the record. You guys know what on the record means? I would use your name and your position, journalism student at TC Williams. So I developed enough sources over the years so I knew who to call when something happened, like what happened in Texas. So I talked to this guy, and he told me they had never forwarded the information about this guy's past record. So we were able to break that story.
Okay, cool.
It's all about who you know.
Thank you.
I'm Mackenzie, also a freshman. I was wondering, what was your opinion on technology, like in battlefield areas, like
You mean like social
disarming
media
bombs,
kind of
like
thing, or-
robots, different like other like new technologies that we have today, like drones.
Yeah, well, they're very helpful. All sorts of new technologies. There are robots that can go into a house and look around with a camera on it. Sometimes they have arms, so if there's a suspected bomb, it can go over and defuse the bomb, so a soldier doesn't have to walk into that building and do it on his own. So that can help, obviously, save lives. And also the technology of drones, which only started after the September 11th attacks. There really were no drones, really decent drones prior to that. So those can loiter, as they say, over an area, sometimes for many hours, and just watch a location to see if there are bad guys there, to see if people are moving weapons. It can watch. I've seen them follow Taliban forces in the night, because they also can take pictures at night. It's called infrared. So the camera can take a picture of a human body. The heat of the body lets off a signature. So if you watch it on a screen, you can see these sort of milky figures moving along the darkness. So it has helped quite a bit, particularly in warfare. But you always want to have a human on the ground, just to make sure things are going right, and also talking with people. You can't only have technology, but it has helped quite a bit, particularly over the last 15 years, 16 years of war.
Do you think it's going to improve over the years in the battlefield? Like they're gonna use more technology that they aren't using right now?
Yeah, they use different types of technology. It's all getting smaller as well. So they can use, they're looking at using, let's say, swarming robotics, so they could be the size of a bee. It could fly into a room and look around and then fly out again, as opposed to something today. Some of the drones today are as long as this room, sometimes even bigger. So if you want to be secret, you can just have this little thing fly in a room, look around, and then fly out again. It's a technological challenge, just developing something that size, but that's something they're working on. You'll see a lot of that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, Mr. Bowman. My name's Hunter. I'm a freshman here at TC. What is your opinion on the administration's view in Middle East policy? And you seem to have a favorable view of Secretary of Defense General Mattis in the past. Is this correct?
Yeah, I got to know him 15 years ago in Afghanistan when he was a one-star general, and he was leading the Marines that went from a desert base to capture Kandahar airfield. So I got to know him quite well over the years when he rose up the ranks to become the top general in the Middle East. And then he retired. I had him over to NPR showing him around. So I've gotten to know him quite well over the years. I think he's overall a pretty good guy, smart guy. And he has a tough job, as we know. Just working in this administration and the issues he has to deal with, it's a much more complex world than the one even he knew back 15 years ago, with the wars in Syria, now Iraq, Afghanistan again has continued. Nobody thought at that time that the Afghan war would continue for another 15 years and still going. You have troubles in North Africa as well, so he's got a lot on his plate. As far as the Middle East policy, you're gonna have to be more specific because it's a big area.
Well, more specifically, in Syria with Turkey, do you think we'll ever go to war with Turkey?
I don't think so. There are a lot of tensions now with Turkey, and it involves the war in Syria. The U.S. is using Kurdish rebel troops to fight ISIS, and I was over there last month watching and meeting some of those guys to see what they're doing. The problem is Turkey sees a lot of these Kurdish fighters as part of a separatist Kurdish movement in Turkey. Does that make sense? They see them as allied with those guys who are trying to split apart from Turkey. The Kurdish guys in Turkey, the separatists, are considered a terrorist group by Turkey as well as the United States. And there are links between the Syrian Kurdish guys fighting with the U.S. and those Turkish guys. So Turkey wants the U.S. to abandon the Kurdish guys they're fighting with against ISIS, and the United States says we need them to fight ISIS. They're the best fighters. They're very tough fighters. We're not going to just turn our backs on them. So that's a continuing problem that the U.S. has with Turkey. They're trying to work it out. I was at the Pentagon today talking to people about that. But it's going to be pretty tough. It's not going to end anytime soon. But as far as the U.S. actually fighting with Turkey, I don't think it's going to happen. They're both NATO allies. They have a lot of connections beyond that, going back decades. So I don't think you're going to see an actual fight between Turkey and the U.S. over this issue, but it's still very, very tense.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Hello, Mr. Bowman. My name is Lauren Larson. I'm a freshman here. You've worked in both broadcast and print journalism. How would you describe the differences between the two?
Well, they're hugely different because with print, you're just sitting there, you're writing your story. Sometimes it takes hours to put together a story. You have editors. You go through a chop chain of editors who will change it and say, well, it has to be 20 inches, let's say. One editor will say, and the other editor will say, well, can you cut it back some? We can't fit it in the paper tomorrow. So, and then it's a very solitary kind of work, sitting, doing print work. With broadcast, it's a completely different type of writing. I tell people that with print, if it's done right, it's more like prose. With radio, it's more like poetry. You use very short sentences, sometimes sentence fragments when you're on the air, because when you're talking with someone, it's far different from actually writing something. We're having a conversation. You would say, well, tell me what's going on in Syria. And I might write 3 or 4 long sentences for print, but if I said, just like we were talking about with the Kurds see these guys as being terrorists. It would never write it that way in a newspaper story, right? You would say the Kurdish fighters, but if we're having a conversation, and you want to be as conversational as possible on radio, you would just use a more relaxed language than you would in a newspaper article. And again, sentence fragments, and there's a performance element as well to radio that obviously you wouldn't have in print, that you have to punch certain words. So I tell people it's almost like you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you're talking with your uncle who's being kind of a pain on a various issue. And you're like, listen, this is what you have to remember. And it's effective to do that on radio too, because someone's driving down the street listening to your story. They don't want a lot of facts and figures and long sentences. They want, what is the bottom line? So a lot of times I'll actually use that on the radio, say, hey, the bottom line is this. Turkey has a problem with the Americans fighting with these Kurdish rebels. They see them as terrorists, you see. Much quicker way to get to the bottom line, and you wouldn't have to do 4 or 5 sentences like you would in a print story. It was difficult at first, breaking the habit of writing a newspaper story as opposed to a radio story. But now I find it just absolutely fascinating. I can't imagine going back to a newspaper and writing a newspaper story now. And a lot of it is using natural sound too. If you go over to Syria or Afghanistan, you're using sound of people in a marketplace or people, just talking in a different in Pashto language. It's you want to put your listener in that place. With print, you want to. We had an old editor who said, "I want you to take me to where you're going. So put me in that marketplace in Afghanistan. What are the smells and sounds and sights?" He said, "I want to smell the camel dung." He would say that about your writing. You want to have vivid writing. With broadcast, with radio, you can't see it, so I have to paint a picture. What am I seeing? And the sounds can kind of bring you along. It could be the call to prayer. It could be a donkey walking down the street making a sound, right? It could be lambs out in the field. It could be gunfire that tells you, I'm not in Alexandria. I am over in Afghanistan. Or so. You see that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
Hi,
Hi.
Blyne Tesfaye, sophomore here at TC. What is your take on the ban against transgender individuals not allowed to enlist in the military?
Well, they've changed that a bit. Defense Secretary
Yeah.
Mattis has said that those transgender folks who are already in the military can serve. They're not going to kick anyone out. And what he has told his advisors and associates is, if someone is willing to serve in the military, that person has raised his or her right hand and said, I want to serve this country, we take that very seriously. We're not going to throw them out. The issue now is recruiting, okay? Can someone who's a transgender person actually be recruited into the military? Now, those already in, they seem to be okay. They're going to stay. So can you recruit someone who's transgender? We should have a policy on that from the White House within the next week or so. But the courts already have ruled, federal courts, that you can't brush someone aside because that person is transgender. So my guess is transgender people will be able to be recruited, and those who are in will be able to stay. As far as the numbers, they're all over the map. There's been a study that roughly 2,000 transgender folks in the military. And the military is about 2 to 3 million. So we're talking small numbers. Advocates put that number at about 15,000. But a guy I talked with in the Army said, we only have right now in the Army is about 500,000, roughly 80. So, the numbers are kind of all over the map. But as far as the future, I think you'll likely see transgender folks being able to serve just like anyone else.
Thank you.
Hello, Mackenzie again. I was wondering what your opinions are about fake news and the definition, how it's been used in our media and lives today.
Well, fake news, is basically someone creating something. We saw the Russians doing this during the campaign in 2016, where they actually created news stories that were absolutely fake. There was no question about it. They just made it up out of whole cloth. What I'm upset about is when people, particularly from the White House podium, start tossing out the term fake news, or when politicians use it against people like me, people who work for established news organizations. I find that a slur. I find that incredibly offensive that someone would call it fake news. We all make mistakes, but to to insinuate that we make up news, I find that abhorrent. I think it's disgraceful. And I think people at the White House, the reporters, should call them on that and say, don't say that to us, because that's just disgraceful. That's my personal view. No reporter I know, and I've been doing this most of my adult life, makes up their stories. That's just something we don't do. So for someone to say that, again, is I think is just beyond the pale.
Has anyone said about your stories or about NPR in general that you guys are fake news or your stories are fake news, basically?
They've never said it about me or anybody I work with. I mean, people will question the facts in a story and so forth. Sometimes the tone of it, they'll say, I thought you were too aggressive in how you portrayed a certain person or a certain story. But they've never said people have just completely made up a story. Now, there have been instances in the news business where people actually have created stories, made up fictitious people and said they're real. That has happened. But that's almost unheard of. It's happened, I can think of, again, I've been doing this for decades, I can think of 2 or 3 occasions I know of in all that time where people have actually made up characters. And that clearly is fake. But again, to say that you're all fake or you make up your stories, I just think is disgraceful.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm Abigail St. Jean. I'm a freshman, and I wanted to know, do you think journalists' role in democracy has changed since the 2016 election?
I'm sorry.
Oh, do you think journalists' role in democracy has changed since the 2016 election?
I really don't think, so my eyes don't burn out.
Okay.
I don't think it's changed. I think it's become more important since the 2016 election, again, because of some of the charges you've seen from the president, from some of his people, and from some politicians attacking journalists. Sometimes physically, they've been attacked over the past couple of years. I think we have to continue doing our work aggressively. I think we have to stick with the facts. A lot of times you'll get in heated discussions with people. You've seen it at the White House. If you watch any of the White House briefings, some of the reporters will get upset and say, how dare you say that about me? I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should just ask our questions, continue to ask questions, and then, again, just stick with the facts of the story and try to not to get into any kind of personal disputes with people. It's not about me. It's not about those reporters. It's about the story. How many want to be journalists? How many? 4? 5? How many? You want to be one?
I
Yep.
had a question for you also.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
What has the transition been like from the Baltimore Sun to NPR, and how has that affected your work life and your personal life, like your family and
Well, again, the big
disciplines?
transition is just learning to write in a different way, and then that performance part of it as well. And I find also that it's with newspapers it was more like a long race, because usually you would have all day to write your story, and your deadline, the final deadline would be sometimes midnight or 1 in the morning. See, with radio, with NPR, there are 2 shows that anchor NPR. One is Morning Edition, which runs from 5 to 7 in the morning, and the other is All Things Considered, that goes from 4 to 6. So a lot of times something will happen that you have to go on the air, sometimes within 20 minutes, sometimes immediately. I was in bed in my bathrobe reading, and my son came upstairs a few years ago and said, "Dad, NPR's on the phone." This was 10 o'clock at night. I said, "Oh, God, this can't be good." And my editor said, "President goes out in 20 minutes. We think they got bin Laden." And I can't repeat what I said, but he said, "You have to go on the air right now." So I'm in my bathrobe, and I can actually broadcast from my my house because we have what's called an ISDN line. It's a very clean line, so it sounds like I'm sitting next to you when I'm talking. It doesn't sound like you're on the phone or cell phone or Skype. It's a nice clean sound that sounds like I'm right in the studio. So I would basically went right on the air and was meantime calling people at the same time to find out what was going on. So there's an immediacy to it that I kind of like. Sometimes it's nerve-wracking, sometimes your heart's beating too fast, but most of the time it's actually a lot of fun. There was another incident, it was a year ago, I guess. I was working out at the Y and came back in the morning and got a call from one of my editors, and he said, you have to go on in 10 minutes. I said, what's going on? He said, didn't you see Trump's tweet? I said, what are you talking about? He said, he's tweeting about transgender, and he's going to kick all the transgender folks out of the military. So I'm standing there sweating. I'm like, oh, God. You know, when was the last story I did on transgender? So I quickly looked on my iPhone for my last story, called a couple of people to find out what's going on with policy, and I had to go on the air immediately and just talk about that issue. So, again, it's more like a sprint. And so I go on the air with the morning edition host. He said, what do you think it means? I said, I really have no idea. But again, you have to move quickly. But that's the fun part of journalism too, is the immediacy of it, the competition, moving quickly, finding out people to talk with. I think that's the most fun of all.
Can you just explain more on how, like, your travel, like going to Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq, and a bunch of other places, how that's impacted your family, like, exactly, instead of just, like, it's, like, fun to go there and all that and read and hear about news, but more how it's impacted your family?
It was really hard at first. I started going over 11 years ago, and my son, who's now in college, a sophomore in college, he was a little kid at the time, and he would cry when I was ready to go. They were worried about me. And my daughter, who was a student here, she was too young, so she didn't realize it. But, you know, as I got older, they would be really scared. My wife was very scared. She wouldn't listen to any of my stories while I was over there because she was afraid. And there were, you know, a handful of times we came under fire, and it got very dangerous. And then 2 years ago, we lost our producer and our photographer. They were killed. We were all in a convoy, and we came under fire, and they were killed in that convoy. So I was unable to call my wife. NPR called her, so she learned about it before I was able to call her. So you can imagine how nervous she was, but at least they knew we were safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Luke Randall. I'm a sophomore at TC, and you mentioned the ISDN line. What other technologies have helped in broadcast journalism?
Well, that's a particular technology I'm not sure how long that's been around. There's also an app you can get on your phone that's called iReport It, which is also a very clean sound. These are actually great to use. These are broadcast quality, these phones, which is really nice. So I can push a couple of buttons and, you know, I could interview one of you guys, send it back to NPR, and it's good enough to go on the air. Also, some of the microphones we have are much better than they used to be. The equipment, thankfully, gets smaller and smaller, which is good when you're actually out in the field and you have to carry the stuff around. We have what's called a BGAN, which used to be about the size of this podium here. It probably weighed 40 pounds, and it would connect to a satellite. And now they're like this big. You know, it's like smaller than a cereal box. But again, if it's 120 degrees and you're in Afghanistan and you have to carry the stuff around, it's a lot nicer when it's smaller and lighter.
Oh, thank you.
Here.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Scholl, a freshman.
I thought you looked familiar.
Yeah. What surprised you the most about reporting overseas?
I guess there have been a lot of surprises over the years. Just how people live, how lucky we are for what we have. You know, you come back from places like that and people are complaining about their latte is cold, or, you know, they're having a bad day, a bad hair day, and you see kids rooting around in garbage to try to eat, or people have lost loved ones. I just got back from Syria. The city of Raqqa, which used to be the capital of the Islamic State, it is completely gone, flattened. I mean, there's no building standing. And people trying to get back into their homes now. Before ISIS left, they put all sorts of bombs inside those destroyed homes because they knew people would come back. And they put them in chairs, in sofas, tea kettles, even baby bottles, little bombs. And so consequently, people now going back into their homes, and we talked to some of them, some of the people would get injured, they would lose limbs, eyesight, because they're trying to go back to their homes. So the government's trying to tell them, the Americans are saying, don't go back to your house until we can actually sweep it for bombs and make sure it's safe. But they lose about 36 people a week with casualties. And a casualty is dead or wounded.
Okay.
But it's horrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Devin Cohout. I'm a sophomore here at TC. Do you see any possible future changes at NPR, and what are they, if so?
Well, as far as changes, one thing we're doing, and a lot of people are doing, is doing more podcasts. They seem to be very popular. We have all sorts of podcasts for foreign news, domestic news. We're also doing a lot more with our website, like a lot of people are, putting stories up immediately. So the bin Laden incident, as soon as there was an announcement, we would have something on the web. Who is bin Laden, pictures of him, and so forth over the years. So things are moving faster as well, as we all know. You can tweet, we put stuff on Facebook. We use Twitter quite a bit. I just think, the technology we're using is what everyone else uses. But the big thing is to get it up as quickly as you can and accurately as you can as well.
Thank you.
What do you think is the most important asset as a journalist?
Being curious and being tenacious. Did everybody know what being tenacious means?
Yeah.
What? Like stubborn?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to take no for an answer. Because people will say, I can't talk with you. Or I can't talk with you today. You'll say, how about tomorrow? I'll come by your house. Let's meet for coffee. Don't take no for an answer. Keep following the story, all angles of the story. Get to know people as a journalist. The only, the best thing, or really the big thing about being a journalist is you have to develop sources. You have to find out what's going on out there, because when someone stands at a podium like this and tells you what's going on in Afghanistan, first of all, you want to go there and see it for yourself to see if that person is telling the truth. And you want to get as many voices as you can. So people, let's say at the Pentagon, or people on Capitol Hill who might have a different view of what's going on. You want to have a good network of sources to make sure that what you're hearing, what this person is telling you, is accurate.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Araceli. I'm a freshman at TC. So, how difficult is it for you to get information from the Pentagon?
Good question. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes people don't want to talk. And again, the benefit of covering it for so long is you do develop all these sources. You know who to go to. Sometimes they won't let you use their name. But you just keep working at it. But in this administration, it's much more difficult because, as we all know, what the president has to say about the press, he doesn't have very good press relations, so that filters down to the people he's appointed at the Pentagon, the press people there too. They tend to be more difficult to deal with than we've seen in past administrations. But you just keep working at it. Again, developing those sources. Sometimes I meet sources down in Delray, where I live, at the Pork Barrel Barbecue. You don't have to meet with them at the office. You can meet with them anywhere.
Thank you.
Sure.
What exactly is your advice for us young journalists to do if we want to pursue journalism as a career when we are older?
First of all, do you have a language?
I'm right now taking Spanish, but
Good.
I'm not that really good at it.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a language. Particularly if you like it. If you don't like studying languages, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I think we all should have languages. I'm the only one in my family that doesn't have another language, and my daughter keeps reminding me of that all the time. My son is in college now, studying Spanish and German now. I think it's really good to have as a journalist, have that extra language. It's helpful. Keep writing as much as possible, and reading. Reading good writers is a way to improve your writing skills. And your questions, too. Work on asking that incisive question that people can't wiggle out of. I used to cover Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld, who was a pretty irascible guy, pretty tough guy, and people used to ask him these sort of what I call flabby questions. They would say something like, a lot of people in the Pentagon think that the war in Iraq isn't going well. And he would laugh and say, there are a lot of people in the Pentagon saying all sorts of things. It was really a flabby, poor question. The question should have been, for example, Senator John McCain of Arizona just got back from Iraq. He says the security situation isn't what it should be. It's much more dangerous than what you're saying, Mr. Secretary. You see, a specific question, you're using someone's name who is actually there rather than just this open-ended, a lot of people, because he can easily skirt out of that as well.
Thank you.
Also, listen to what people say to you, too. A lot of times you'll ask them a question. This is true particularly with politicians and often with generals. They will answer the question they want to answer, not the question you've asked. Or they'll shift it and they'll say, well, I think the real question is, as a way to just bypass your question. And you listen and say, well, that's all well and good, but that's not the question I asked you. A lot of people are afraid to do that. You can't be afraid to do it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hunter again. How do you feel about bias in the media?
I'm against it.
Well, how exactly do you define bias?
Bias is when you have one particular. We see it today. We see it with MSNBC, which is a very liberal television network. We see it with Fox, as we all know, which is very conservative. If you're a journalist, you have to ask hard questions of everyone and be fair to everyone. Those particular organizations are very much one-sided, and I think it hurts all journalists because of it. I think you can't be a journalist and be biased. I mean, we all have our, let's be honest, we all have our views on certain issues, but your job is to ask the right questions, hard questions of everyone. You say, that's the whole point, not to basically side with one political, view or the other. You have to be right down the middle, ask the questions, and not come off as a partisan. Those groups in particular are partisans, and they give us all a bad name.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
How difficult do you find it to avoid bias over a controversial topic?
Well, I keep myself in check. I have views on just about everything. But again, you want to just stay right down the middle. What is the issue? What are the questions to ask these people, right? On all sides of the question. I think that's how you check it. Also, we all have editors, and they'll keep an eye on you and say, hey, you didn't get this other perspective on this other person who's mentioned in the story, or this other side of this angle that you missed. So they kind of keep people in check as well.
Hello, I'm Ebenezer Markey, a freshman at TC Williams, and I wanted to ask you, as an experienced journalist, how would you identify a reliable source?
That's a good question. A reliable source is someone that actually knows what's going on, just doesn't have an opinion like everyone else. Are they in a position to know exactly what's going on? That's key. And can you bounce that information off others to make sure it's accurate? But I've been dealing with some of the same sources for years and years. They've proven to be reliable. Their information is accurate, and that's the best you can hope for. But you have to check up on everyone. And there's a journalism saying, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And that's a good thing to live by.
Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Hi, Mr. Bowman. I'm Courtney Joseph. I'm a freshman here. I want to ask you, what led you to become a journalist?
When I went to college, I took a couple of journalism courses. I studied history. And if you are thinking of studying, excuse me, if you're going into journalism, I would recommend a journalism minor and a major in some area like history, political science, biology, whatever you're really interested in, because that provides you a body of knowledge you can draw on in your journalism career. You can learn a lot of this on the job or just the basic courses in journalism, but you need economics or whatever you want to study, wherever you're interested in. So when I got out of college, I thought about teaching, I thought about government work, I thought about journalism, and there was a job opening on a small newspaper outside of Boston where I grew up, and I just loved it from day one. You're not sitting in an office all the time. You're going out meeting people, sometimes strange people. Sometimes it's a crime scene. Sometimes it's a politician who's interesting. Sometimes famous people coming to town. Every day, almost every day was fascinating. And then I went to Washington, worked on a wire service, and then went to the Baltimore Sun. And again, every day, almost every day, it's been absolutely fascinating. I wouldn't give it up for anything. Any amount of money.
Thank you.
Hello again.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could describe a specific encounter you've had with like a journalistic dilemma or ethical dilemma, either something you've experienced or something you've come across.
Well, one of the issues we come up with quite often is what's called operational security. So if you're covering the military and you know there's an operation that's going to start, you can't report about it until the operation actually begins. So we've been given information for years now about, pending operation. So we would only report a little bit about it, and not exactly the date and time and so forth. You don't want to put people in danger. Also, we're told, particular information, we can only use part of it, and again, it goes to operations, usually. And also, I've met certain people who are still in government who have said things to me off the record. And off the record means I'm not supposed to use it at all. Things that would be very interesting to use today, people who are real high-level people who I've had a couple of beers with over the years. But what they told me, again, off the record, you're not supposed to use it at all. You can't use their name with it. I would like to, but I can't because it's ethically, you just don't want to do that. That's wrong.
Thank you.
Hi again.
Hi.
How has journalism changed throughout your career?
There were fewer newspapers than when I first started. There were fewer journalism jobs because most of them were in newspapers. A lot of them have closed or cut back on their staffs. They've cut back a lot on foreign bureaus. When I was at the Baltimore Sun, we had 10 bureaus overseas. They closed all of them to save money. And as I said earlier, it's much faster with Facebook, with tweets. You do have, it moves lightning speed compared to when I first started. When I started, there was no Facebook, there were no tweets. So it was basically, TV news. If they could get to the scene of what's going on within 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, you would find out what's going on. There'd be a radio report, let's say, but nothing immediate like you have with Twitter, So it's moved a lot faster, fewer jobs, unfortunately. but I still recommend it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have time for one or two more?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Last one or two?
Uh-huh.
Hi, I'm Madison, a freshman here. What are the plans for change in journalism? Like what are changes that are going to happen, do you think?
I'm not sure what kind of changes you'll see. You'll see, oh man, that's a tough question. It'll get faster. I think you'll see more biased reporters, so quote unquote reporters, coming down in the future, more websites, more bloggers who don't have the background in journalism, who came up through the ranks. And again, I think more partisan. That's unfortunate. So I think you have to be very careful about what sites you go to make sure you're getting the right perspective or an accurate perspective. Some of the main, what they call old media, like the New York Times or the Post, The Economist magazine, NPR. See, the challenge today is you go to some website, you have no idea what this thing is. Is it some guy sitting in his basement? Is it, some partisan working for the Russians? Or is it some political operative that's just feeding fake news? You have to be very careful. We're going to see more of that in the future, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Luke here. I'm Luke Wilson. I'm here at sophomore at TC. And is there any other than like going on the air and talking, is there any other effective either social media or communicative system that you use to break news or talk about your either opinions or?
Yeah, I use Facebook. I post a lot of my stories on Facebook. I use Twitter, not as much as other people do. I just tweeted something out the other day. Trump was at the White House saying, remember, he fired the Secretary of State Tillerson, and he said he disagreed with him over the Iran nuclear deal. He said, I thought it was a bad idea. So I tweeted out, Trump said this is why he fired Tillerson. I said, at the same time, on Capitol Hill, the top general for the Middle East said that he, the defense secretary, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are all in favor of the Iran nuclear deal. So that's the kind of thing I would tweet. But again, I don't do it as much as other people do. Some of my friends are on it all the time. But if there's something breaking, I'll do it on Twitter and then go on the air with NPR.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Bowman, that was fascinating. Thank you for coming over to spend the time with us, and thanks to our student journalists, and a special thanks to Ben Lyon and Ms. Zephron and the folks in the TV production class. We couldn't do this without you. We appreciate the partnership, and we appreciate everything you do. So thank you for all the technical support, folks in the control room and the camera operators. And it's been a great experience. Many thanks, Mr. Bowman.
Great questions.
All right. And so long from T.C. Williams.